Rule 11 is divided into three parts, A, B, and C. Rule 11A holds a nasty word that makes the application of the legal text difficult. It says software intended to provide information which is used to take decisions with diagnostic or therapeutic purposes is classified as Class 2A. Let's stop there for a second. So it means that any software that contributes information which is intended to be used in diagnostic or therapeutic cases is at least a Class 2A. Except if such decisions, basing on the output of the software, may have an impact that may cause, meaning the word may holds not the likelihood, but only the severity that is following with death or irreversible deterioration of a person's state of health. So we look here at a rule that is incompletely written when we look at risk management, because the likelihood is completely missing and is only represented with the word may. As a result, we can construct a case where every software that is qualifying as a medical device can fall into Class 3, and that was not the intention of the legislator. So how to apply Rule 11A is subject to one of the next slides. Rule 11B clarifies in an almost unchanged way that software intended to monitor physiological processes is classified as 2A, except if they are vital physiological processes where the nature of variations could result in immediate danger to the patient. Then we have a Class 2B. From a pre-market perspective, there's virtually no difference except for sampling of technical documentation. From a post-market perspective, there are higher or shorter intervals in monitoring. You might want to imagine what falls into Rule 11C, all other software that is classified as Class 1, where we're looking at prediction and prognosis software which are not directly mentioned in diagnosis, or which are not necessarily part of diagnosis or therapeutic purposes. So here, the extent of the Class 1 is limited to a bare minimum compared to where the MDD came from. Now, how to apply Rule 11A? When we look at the next slide, we might want to use something that was coming from the IMDRF, the International Medical Devices Regulators Forum. In their document N12, they came up with a risk categorization scheme, which was later picked on by the MDCG, the Medical Devices Coordination Group of the European Commission, and was put into a guidance called MDCG 2019-11. They explain that the significance of the information along with the severity of the disease type or the intervention type create two vectors which play into the game in order to determine whether the information provided by an independent medical device software is in Class 3, Class 2B, or Class 2A. Class 1, of course, is missing here because that is taken over in a separate section of the Rule 11. So software and artificial intelligence, what's the relationship with that? Well, first, we need to ensure that the definition of software originates from a MedDev guidance under the Medical Devices Direction. And it says practically that software is a set of instructions that processes input data into output data. A set of instruction can be very binary, but can also be very static. So the question relies, of course, is machine learning or artificial intelligence a set of instruction? As manufacturers of medical device software placed also machine learning software or models on the market since quite a few years, we believe that artificial intelligence falls under the term of software as well. Well, when we think of artificial intelligence, we sometimes have science fiction in our mind, that software is able to change itself during runtime in a way that is not controlled by the manufacturer, and that it gets loose or gets rogue on humanity. Well, let's forget about that, but looking at the concept of artificial intelligence, it can change over time. But looking at the concepts of MDR and the new legislative framework, it probably should not in every case. Honestly, you should, as a manufacturer, have good controls over the performance and safety of a medical device software. Whenever performance characteristics of the software that are relevant to fulfill the intended use change, the legislators see that as a significant change. Other significant changes is to expand the intended use or users from pure professional users to include lay users, or to expand from um, adult population to child population, changing safety characteristics and adding more mitigations, or simply changing the brand or manufacturer by rebranding a medical device constitute a significant change. The significant change is recognized as a new product, is assigned with a new UDI, and needs to be placed onto the market as a new device and follow again independent market access controls. So when reflecting that to the concept of artificial intelligence, of course, AI cannot change itself during runtime in an uncontrolled way. There are certain boundaries where that might be possible, but this is still conceptual theory, and there is no common rules established which we could flag or highlight here at that very moment. Other illeties from the general safety and performance requirements are also very interesting to apply to be applied for artificial intelligence. Note that there is in the GSPRs the term repeatability, and the clinical requirements ask for a certain explainability, which is very interesting to be applied for AI. Repeatability implies that there is an input-output pair associated, so that when I receive the identical input data to a medical device software, the exact same output needs to be produced. Of course, if the software is being changed, a different output is being produced after that change, and it's no longer the same repeatable outcome. Users expect to know what the software is doing, and manufacturers also must know what a software is doing. So what are the input criteria for a provided by that software? And that falls into explainability. So residual risks that need to be encompassed and mitigated by the operators and users need to be explained to them, highlighting, of course, that they need to know how the software is working and what it can do and what it cannot do. There's also in the definitions of artificial intelligence a concept of degree of autonomy phrased. Those definitions are, of course, of a horizontal approach and are not intended specifically for medical devices, but as being horizontal in nature, they might be applied to them as well. The degree of autonomy is a very unfortunate understanding because every medical device is expected to be able to fulfill its intended purpose on its own or in its intended combinations, implying that the degree of autonomy is always 100% within the intended purpose. As we've learned before, the technological characteristics of a medical device must not exceed the intended purpose, questioning, of course, to what do we balance or calibrate the autonomy and a degree to that. If somebody would ask me today, how would you phrase the degree of autonomy? I would answer with the significance of information. Here we see how many decision steps the software takes already from a physician or from a healthcare provider. And for example, if the software is intended to perform the diagnosis itself and tells based on a X-ray image, you have a broken bone here, that's the diagnosis. It could be considered as more autonomous than highlighting there could be a fracture risk region to an assessing physician who needs to file a report afterwards. So significance of information, again, a concept introduced by the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, is something where the degree of autonomy can be modeled against. Coming from the Chinese NMPA and CMDE requirements, they got a different understanding and a more thorough understanding of data and AI life cycle, which they phrase into a model. When starting at the very bottom of the circle, where we see that the data processing needs to be done by a model, Of course, data processing implies that there is data to be processed. Now, a model cannot process any data, but the intended data that it is intended to process. What is intended data implies, of course, there is data requirements on quality, signal to noise ratio, resolution, or slice thickness. Coming from here, Chinese regulators believe that when training such a model, the selection of the population and the methods of data acquisition, if relevant, need to be documented and traced because they make the essential performance of a machine learning model in the future. After having done performance evaluation, the medical device gets certified and underlies change management and turns all over again if there's a significant change to be alerted to to healthcare authorities. Now, regulatory affairs, as I calibrated before, is an international matter, and a good network is key to excel in that dimension. I want to highlight now to compare the European market with a movement that was done in the last month of the Obama legislation, where the 21st Century Cures Act was introduced. The Cures Act was intended to speed up market access and support new technologies for better healthcare. And in opposite to the EU MDR, they went into deregulation of decision support software for professional users under certain preconditions. Where the European Union moves more into a higher risk class, the 21st Century Cures Act allows the FDA to exempt certain decision support software from pre-market controls, but of course keeps them under their oversight so when anything goes wrong. There are 4 conditions. So the software does not acquire, process, or analyze medical images or signals. The purpose is only to display, analyze, or print medical information about the patient or a medical condition, to support or provide recommendations to healthcare professionals, basically to digitize a clinical pathway or clinical guideline, and to enable in that healthcare professional to independently review their recommendations made by pulling out the paper or the book and read it through. So with that, the US FDA foresee a better uptake of new technologies in the healthcare market. And honestly, that is something that should be taken into account in regulatory strategic decision making. If you need clinical data, you can access markets with lower regulatory burdens compared to the European Union in the first place. Not quite sure whether that was intended by EU legislators. Create clinical data there under conditions applicable and sufficient for EU purposes, and then later on repurpose them for the EU regulatory market access. When looking in the future, the CE mark that is harmonized in the European Union at a union level is of course a good step forward to access the market, but it doesn't mean you have a market. In order to have a market or to build a market, reimbursement is one of the key factors. Reimbursement means that a technology is put in the market that addresses an unmet clinical need and where insurance companies reimburse their usage or their prescription, or if a certain point is done better or with less resources, or in the best case, both. Also here, clinical data is needed. So when you're looking into creating clinical data for the CE marking and you have reimbursement at your strategy, you want to look into including that reimbursement data or the data, clinical data needed for reimbursement right from the very beginning in the clinical investigations that are also necessary for CE marking to not do things twice. Reimbursement, however, is on a national level because in the European Union, we have national health systems. And of course, the benefits and the use of devices sometimes change and with their associated value from system to system. In the German reimbursement, there was a huge step forward made with the Digital Health Act, the Digitalversorgungsgesetz in Germany, where digital reimbursement was introduced in a very thorough way. However, there are additional requirements put to medical device software in addition to the CE marking, including IT security requirements, registration in a BFARM database, announcement of significant changes, and technical requirements to be compatible with the telematic infrastructure. In order to prevent you from having a CE mark product and following a necessity to change it again in order to meet those requirements for the German reimbursement market, you probably want to have those requirements included in your product's design from the very beginning in order to have the same product undergoing a clinical investigation and not to justify that you needed to do a new revision of your product, maybe with a significant change, and then justify why from another product the clinical data was utilized in the reimbursement application. Note that reimbursement in Germany for health apps is possible for MDR products only and only for the risk classes 1 and 2A. So we went now through that whole story of regulatory affairs. We started with the vision, we phrased the intended purpose, we've classified and probably placed a product onto the market, developed further markets when looking internationally, and also calibrated with a strategy to establish maybe a new golden standard or to go for reimbursement and to open new market opportunities. With that, I thank you for your attention, for having attended this COVID-X webcast on regulatory introduction. I'm looking forward to be seeing you all with exciting discussions and questions in the AMA sessions. And with that, thank you again. My name is Tobias, and thanks for having me.